1999, and it's the Society's highest honor. It's presented to a Nova Scotia lawyer who, based on nominations that are submitted by both lawyers and the public. The Distinguished Service Award Committee makes recommendations to Council each year based on 6 key criteria: integrity, professional achievement, service to the profession, community service, reform, meaning contribution to the betterment of the law or improvement of the justice system, and the overall category of espousing the highest ideals of the legal profession. This year, the Society is delighted to present the Distinguished Award to Bruce Wildsmith, QC, of Brass Corner, Lunenburg County. I'm going to ask him to raise his hand now. We'll call him, oh, Bars! Oh, I'm so sorry. If Kay Rodenizer was in the room, she'd kill me. She too is from Bars Corner. We're also very honored today to welcome Chief P.J. Prosper, who will bring remarks from the Assembly of the Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs in just a moment. Bruce is legal counsel with the Assembly, and I would be sure to pronounce it in a way that would offend, so I'm going to say negotiation office. Widely hailed as one of Canada's top Aboriginal law practitioners, his pursuit of Mi'kmaq access to natural resources and treaty rights has resulted in a much clearer understanding of Aboriginal rights and their place in Canada. Bruce was a full-time faculty member at Dalhousie Law School from 1979 through 2003. During that time, he was also counsel for the Union of Nova Scotia Indians. From 2002 until 2011, he was lead negotiator for the Mi'kmaq in the Mi'kmaq Canada Nova Scotia Made in Nova Scotia process. A love of science also figures prominently in his career. He has an undergraduate degree in biology as well as his law degrees from Dalhousie and Harvard universities. Bruce is known internationally for his work on aquaculture law and policy. He helped establish Dalhousie's Marine Environmental Law Institute as a leading world center for educational programs and research addressing natural resource management challenges. An exceptional volunteer within the profession in his community, Bruce was active within the Society in the 1980s and 1990s, serving on the Race Relations Committee, Qualifications Committee, and Discipline Subcommittee. He served on the board for the Atlantic Canada Salmon Conservation Federation, among other community work. He has been a dedicated mentor to several generations of younger Mi'kmaq lawyers, some of whom have followed his lead into public policy and rights-based litigation. Before I present the award to Bruce, I'd like to welcome Chief Prosper from the Assembly of Mi'kmaq Chiefs to share some insights on Bruce's impact and legacy.
Thank you, Julia. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to help introduce this year's recipient of the Nova Scotia Barristers Society Distinguished Service Award to Bruce Wildsmith. I am certainly very honored to be here. As the lead chief of the Justice Portfolio for the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs, I have had the opportunity to work alongside Bruce in various capacities. And like many others, my respect for him has only grown. When Bruce was on faculty at the Dalhousie Law School, his constitutional law class was in high demand. How do I know? Because I was one of those students. With students lining up in the wee hours to ensure enrollment in his section. It is said that in all his time as a full-time faculty member and acting as lead counsel for the Union of Nova Scotia Indians and individuals asserting Aboriginal and treaty rights defenses, Bruce never once canceled or missed a class. This is a clear indication of the respect that Bruce has for those around him and those he is connected to. Bruce has had a long career with his sights set on righting the injustices against Aboriginal peoples, who were simply living their lives according to long-held traditions and their cultural ways. In fact, it was Bruce who first raised systemic racism in the Royal Commission on the Donald Marshall Jr. prosecution as a factor in Jr.'s conviction for a murder he did not commit. Bruce's connections to Marshall did not end with the conclusion of the Royal Commission. In the 1990s, Jr. and Bruce were again before a tribunal. This time, the provincial court answering charges that Marshall contravened the Fisheries Act. The Marshall case has changed the face of Canadian constitutional and Aboriginal law, and it has been cited in over 240 cases. Bruce is also very well known for his role in many other important treaty and Aboriginal rights cases, such as Isaac in 75, Simon in 85, Denny 1990, the Union of Nova Scotia Indians in 96, Bernard in 2003, Stephen Marshall in 2005, and I guess I could go on and on. Bruce's work and dedication to seeing that the Mi'kmaq rightfully have access to natural resources through our covenant chain of treaties has unquestionably resulted in clearer understanding of Aboriginal rights, not only here in Mi'kmaq, but throughout Canada. Senator Dan Christmas put it best in his support letter for Bruce's nomination, and I quote, "Mr. Wildsmith spent the 1900s heroically championing our treaty rights in the Donald Marshall case. For a decade, he toiled as Mr. Marshall's counsel with few resources at his disposal to support the massive legal effort necessary to demonstrate our right to a moderate livelihood fishery. In the end, thanks to his unceasing commitment, we were successful. The connections that he built with his clients had a ripple effect into and throughout the entire Mi'kmaq nation. The ongoing support, wisdom, insight, and guidance that he has provided our people through the positions he has held with the Union of Nova Scotia Indians as lead negotiator for the Mi'kmaq through the development of the Made in Nova Scotia process, and today as legal counsel for this process, the Gwiluma-Gluswahan Negotiation Office, as well as for the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs, does not go unrecognized or unappreciated. Bruce has continued to mentor many young Mi'kmaq lawyers. He has encouraged them and ensured them that we are all well equipped to be his successors in the ongoing struggles for full implementation of Mi'kmaq rights and title. His battles in courtrooms and boardrooms continues to form the basis of how we interpret treaty and Aboriginal rights entitled in today's context. From a Mi'kmaq perspective, he is incredibly deserving of today's recognition. Before I close, I would also be amiss if I didn't also thank and acknowledge Bruce's wife, Ardith Wildsmith, and his sons, BW and Jamie, for their ongoing support and patience. I am sure that there were many nights and weekends missed over the years while Bruce fought battles on behalf of the Mi'kmaq Nation. We want you to know that we appreciate the sacrifices that you have made as a family to allow him to help our people. Bruce, can you please come forward? Bruce, on behalf of the Mi'kmaq Nation, I want to traditionally acknowledge and recognize everything you represent. Thank you for believing and fiercely advocating for our Mi'kmaq rights with a passion and conviction that is unmatched. It is through your tireless efforts that we as a people and as a nation are able to stand proud on our own 2 feet, firmly planted in our Earth Mother Sikamu. Thank you, Bruce, for representing our rights with honor, wisdom, courage, and integrity. Wilalio. Thank you so much.
And now I'm going to call on our Distinguished Service Award winner to make a few remarks of his own.
I was told I would have to say a few words, so I guess I've got a little bit of a script here, but I don't have it completely developed, especially in light of some of the things that have happened today and some of the people who are here attending this event. I am deeply honored by Chief P.J. Prosper and the remarks that he has made and the presentation that he made to me on behalf of the Mi'kmaq. That was completely unexpected and very delightful. I was particularly pleased to hear President Julia speak about this being traditional Mi'kmaq land, and I don't think that too many people have a good understanding of the fact that when Halifax was founded in 1749, and I'm not talking about the controversy over Governor Cornwallis, but when Halifax was founded in 1749, already the Mi'kmaq made extensive use of this harbor as the passageway between the Atlantic and the Bay of Fundy through the Shubenacadie River system. And in addition, there are, and Senator Christmas and I remember going to visit this location, on the Bedford Barrens there are petroglyphs that were thousands of years old, engraved in the rocks. They're still there today. It's not well publicized because of the possibility of tampering or vandalism, but the Mi'kmaq presence here for thousands of years in this very location is represented by that. And indeed, very shortly after Governor Wallace came into Halifax Harbor, the Mi'kmaq sent to him a document indicating you are at the place that belongs to us. And this was provided by the Mi'kmaq in conjunction with the French priest who provided the translation to assert right then and there in 1749 that this was Mi'kmaq territory. Obviously, I'm very honored to receive this award from the Society. It is an award that is judged upon by my colleagues in the profession, and I think has been indicated, there is no higher honor that I could receive from my colleagues than to have been awarded this. I want to thank the Society for it, and perhaps just to go one step beyond that, and to thank the volunteers in the Society, people like our President, Julia, the members of the executive of the Society, and indeed Ron as chairman of the selection committee, and the members of his committee to go through the work of sorting through various applications. I also want to acknowledge and congratulate the other recipients recognized today. 50 years at the bar, Alan and George and John Merrick back there. That is a milestone. I say wow to that. I'm not sure that I could have the tenacity that you folks have demonstrated to stay at the bar that long. I also want to recognize the two law students and one recently graduated law student for their awards. Rhea, Desiree, and Rosalia. It is very nice that the Bar Society puts together an event that recognizes the young budding lawyers coming forward. At the same time, they recognize the 50-year recipients. It's reminded me a little bit of those advertisements where you see the before and the after. Except that here we have 3 women who are up and coming, and they, like our President Julia, may be among the future 50-year people who will no doubt include women. And one can hope that the future of the Nova Scotia Bar will also include more and more, and at the 50-year level, members of the Indigenous, Black, and Mi'kmaq communities. I should point out that many of the Mi'kmaq I work with are graduates of a law school, mostly of the Dalhousie, as it was then known, or the Schulich School of Law. People like Chief P.J. Prosper that just spoke to you about being in my constitutional law class. Viola Robinson and Joe Marshall, both Orders of Canada and graduates of Dal Law School. Janice Maloney, the Executive Director of the Quill-Mi'kmaq-Cliswagan Negotiation Office. Hope I have that close. I think Bernie Francis is here in the room, Mi'kmaq linguist, and he'll no doubt straighten me up about that. Doug Brown, who is the Executive Director of the Union of Nova Scotia Indians. Trevor Bernard, who is the CEO of the Member 2 First Nation. Rosalie Francis, who is with Alan's law firm at the moment, Alan Heyman's firm at Birchall. Naomi Metallic, who was at Birchall's and is now at the Schulich School of Law. All of these Mi'kmaq lawyers came through the law school and are providing services to their community in one way or another. When I think about the kind words that were offered, perhaps overwhelming words that were offered today, I'm reminded of a somewhat humbling passage that appears in Louise Penny's recent book called Glass Houses. The scene in the book has the chief superintendent Armand Garmache on the witness stand, and the judge who hears the case is talking about it to her domestic partner, and the judge is saying, well, Chief Superintendent Gamache said off the stand, no one is as bad as the worst things they've done. And her domestic partner said, well, the converse is true. If I can take a liberty, no one is as good as the best things they have done. The kind of thing that should keep a person humble. I want to thank someone who knows the truth of that statement, that no one is as good as the best things. And the lady has already been acknowledged by Chief Prosper, and that's my wife, Ardith, my life partner for the last 47 years. Not quite as long as the 50-year folks, but getting up there. And I probably could add to that one of my two sons who's here today, who is able to be with us, knowing a little bit of the truth behind the kind words. But I wanted to say that Ardith supported me continually through a lot of times away from home. Again, as Chief Prosper sort of pointed out, there were a lot of times when I was spending extended periods of time away from home, away from Halifax. For example, in Sydney, during the Donald Marshall inquiry into his wrongful prosecution, Antigonish, where all of the Donald Marshall trial events took place, a place called Comoville that many of you may know down on the French shore of Nova Scotia, where there were a number of Mi'kmaq fishermen being prosecuted, and indeed in Fredericton, where a trial of a Mi'kmaq logger named Josh Bernard took place over weeks in Fredericton. She provided and continues to provide endless support, and I want to acknowledge that. As Gillian Allen, someone I'll come to in a moment, said to me recently, Ardith should be co-recipient of this award for all her contributions, so thank you, Ardith. So speaking of Gillian Allen, Gillian is a researcher extraordinaire with the Quilmagh-Moss-Cluswagan Negotiation Office. I would not be here but for her, and I want to acknowledge her and the support that she managed to garner for my application. These things don't happen without somebody acting as a champion, and that was Gillian. Professor David Vanderswag from the Schulich School of Law contributed concerning the Marine program during my time there. Senator Dan Christmas, who I'm delighted to see is here today, as well as the two Order of Canada recipients, Viola Robinson, former commissioner of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Peoples and now the lead negotiator in the Made in Nova Scotia process, and Joe B. Marshall of Eskasoni, longtime executive director of the Union of Nova Scotia Indians, and Chief Terrence Paul from Membertou, who isn't able to be here today because, of all things, he decided to go to his Order of Canada induction in Ottawa. So, as gratifying as it is to receive this award, a very significant part of this is knowing that friends and colleagues think enough to make the application and to support the application. People often ask me, how did I become involved with the Mi'kmaq? And perhaps for the benefit of those up-and-coming people, I would say the role of serendipity was significant. A reoccurring theme to me was serendipity. The unplanned comes your way from time to time, and I think should not be ignored. In my law class was a man named Steve Aronson. And I want to recognize Steve, though he's not any longer in Nova Scotia, because he was the catalyst that brought me into Mi'kmaq issues, and because he himself is a hero when it comes to the Donald Marshall story. And this, I think, plays right up with Desiree's work with the wrongfully convicted and the innocent. When Steve graduated from then Dalhousie Law School, he took a position with the Union of Nova Scotia Indians in Sydney. And he decided not too shortly after we graduated to do some graduate work in Australia in the field of Aboriginal law. And he had a case at that time called Isaac. And this is 1973, 1974. And the Isaac case he had taken to the point where it was going to the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal, or as it was then known, the Appeal Division of the Nova Scotia Supreme Court. And I guess, Robbie McKeegan, we were very fortunate that your father was the Chief Justice of Nova Scotia at the time of the Isaac case. Steve left the case with me. I was then practicing at the predecessor to the Stuart McKelvey law firm. And as a result, the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal in the Isaacs case, under the authorship of then Chief Justice Ian McKeegan, wrote a very extensive decision that reviewed the history of the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia, various treaties, the Royal Proclamation of 1763, etc., and came up with the conclusion that Mr. Isaac should be acquitted. Steve Aronson came back from Australia with his graduate degree. He resumed work with the Union of Nova Scotia Indians. He was the lawyer who took Donald Marshall Jr.'s wrongful conviction to the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal and had the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal overturn that conviction. Unfortunately, in hindsight, I guess, two things happened at that point in time after Mr. Marshall was acquitted. One was that in the process of saying that Mr. Marshall was not guilty, the Court of Appeal, in effect, convicted him of robbery or attempted robbery, and said that the miscarriage of justice was more perceived than real. At the same time, the Union of Nova Scotia Indians was having financial difficulties, as it continually always has, and circumstances were such that Steve decided to leave the practice of law in Nova Scotia and go to Ottawa. But at that time, he had another case that had worked its way up to the Supreme Court of Canada. He had leave that was granted in this case of James Matthew Simon. And the Simon case, he again turned over to me. I did that case in the Supreme Court. It turned out with a successful decision in 1985, upholding the Treaty of 1752 that particularly involves the Sibonacady community. I note that One of the council who appeared on the Simon case in support of our position was a 50-year recipient today, and that's John Merrick, then with the Birchells case, and he appeared on that in support of our position. That decision came down in November this month, a couple days later than the 17th. Came down in November of 1985 successfully. This was shortly after Dow Law School had experienced a fire. The faculty members like myself were being housed in the Killam Library, and I remember before Christmas that year receiving a delegation from the Union Nova Scotia Indians requesting that I get more involved in Mi'kmaq issues. And so, having said yes, since that time in 1985, I've been involved regularly with the Mi'kmaq and with Mi'kmaq issues. I've had the great privilege of working with the Mi'kmaq people. Those that I have known have been very patient, respectful, principled, loyal, and inclusive. They have valued family above all else and have had great respect for elders. All admirable attributes that I value. Over the years, I've looked around rooms that I've been meeting with the Mi'kmaq and realized that quite often I was the only non-Mi'kmaq person in the room. This is not often the case today because there are other non-Mi'kmaq working with the Mi'kmaq and contributing their skills. But for me, it continues to be a great honor to be accepted and trusted, and it continues to be a great privilege to be part of their deliberations as the Mi'kmaq advance toward their future. I thank you, Julia, and thank you, Society.